The war had ended on paper, but not in the minds of those who had lived it. For the Japanese women captured on a remote Pacific island in 1945, surrender meant nothing but dread. The thunder of artillery was gone, the skies no longer tore open with the roar of bombers, yet silence was no comfort. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the weight of warnings drilled into their souls. If the Americans take you, they will strip you of honor. They will touch you, shame you, break you. Death is better than capture. These words had come from officers, from propaganda posters, from mothers whispering to daughters in the dark. Better to hold a knife to your throat than let the enemy's hands fall upon you. Better to leap from a cliff with your child in your arms than live as a prisoner. So when American soldiers finally swept into the shattered village where the women had hidden, there was no relief. There was only terror. Mothers clutched their infants, young women pressed together, older widows muttered prayers. They had seen the propaganda drawings, Americans with leering faces, grotesque hands, fangs where smiles should be. And now the boots were real, the helmets, the rifles, the bark of English commands. The women huddled in a burned-out storehouse, waiting for the nightmare to begin. The door creaked open. A figure filled the frame. Tall, broad-shouldered, rifle slung casually across his chest. The women shrank back, pressing themselves against the wall. The soldier said something in English, then repeated it louder. No one moved. Then another voice entered. A translator, a Japanese-American man wearing a US uniform. "You are prisoners," he said in their tongue. "You will not be harmed. Food will be given. Stay together." The words made no sense. Prisoners were always harmed. Food was always bait. Yet the soldiers stepped back, leaving a bucket of water and a crate of rations on the floor. They did not cross the invisible line that separated them from the women. Hesitation held the room in a choke. Finally, one mother stepped forward, trembling, and dipped a tin cup into the bucket. She drank. Nothing happened. A child reached for bread. No hands grabbed her. The silence remained. Days passed. Each morning, more food. Each night, blankets folded neatly in piles. Soldiers guarded the perimeter, rifles lowered, their eyes deliberately averted. They looked away as the women bathed their children, as they combed lice from their hair, as they whispered in the dark. The shock grew heavier than fear. Marta. No, here her name was Aiko. A young woman barely 20, clutched her bundle tight each night. She whispered to the older women, "Why do they not touch us? Why do they not even look at us?" Ilsa. No, here her name was Sachiko, muttered back, "Because they wait. Cruelty is patient." But cruelty never came. Instead came something stranger. One evening, an officer approached with the translator. He set a small box inside the enclosure. Inside were paper and pencils. "Write," the translator said. "Letters. The Red Cross will carry them." The women stared. Letters? To whom? To families they had long believed dead or unreachable. It was absurd. Yet one by one, they reached for the paper. Aiko scribbled words with a shaking hand. "I am alive. They have not touched us. I do not understand, but I live." She folded the page, pressed it to her chest, then handed it back. The officer nodded once, collected the papers, and left without a word. The women whispered through the night. Some said the letters would be burned. Others said they were a trap. But a tiny seed of something dangerous had been planted. Hope. Still, silence ruled the enclosure. No laughter, no song, no raised voices. To be loud was to invite notice. To sing was unthinkable. Music belonged to festivals, to temples, to gatherings of family, not to captivity. Yet the memory of songs lingered in their minds. Mothers hummed fragments of lullabies under their breath, too quiet to be heard. Girls mouthed the words of folk tunes, but let no sound escape. It was Aiko who broke first. Late one night, as rain tapped against the tin roof, she rocked a child who was not her own. The boy whimpered, feverish, restless. Without thinking, her lips parted. A melody slipped out, soft, broken, but real. It was an old lullaby from her village, a song about cranes flying home across the mountains. The other women froze. Even the child stopped whimpering, staring at her with wide eyes. Aiko's voice wavered, but she finished the song. Silence followed, thicker than before. "Fool," Sachiko hissed, "they will hear." But the footsteps outside did not quicken. The guards did not burst in. The rain went on falling. The next night, another mother sang a different tune, this one about cherry blossoms drifting in spring. A younger girl joined her in a whisper, then another. Soon the room was filled with threads of melody, fragile as spider silk. Still the guards did nothing, and that was the greatest shock of all. Rain drummed steadily on the roof the next morning. A grey curtain that blurred the outlines of the barbed wire fence and the soldiers posted beyond it. Inside the enclosure, the women sat huddled around their children, hair damp, blankets pulled tight. None spoke of the singing from the night before, as if silence could erase it. Yet every woman remembered. Aiko kept her eyes on the ground, cheeks flushed with shame. She had not meant to let the lullaby slip out, but the child had needed comfort. She expected punishment. Perhaps the guards were waiting for nightfall to drag her away, to make an example of her. Every time footsteps passed outside, she flinched. But the guards remained steady, their boots splashing through puddles, their eyes fixed on the horizon. By midday, a translator entered with an officer. The women stiffened, bracing for reprimand. The officer spoke briefly in English. The translator hesitated, then said, "He heard singing. He says, 'You may sing again. No harm will come.'" The words stunned the women into silence. Permission to sing? It made no sense. Voices were dangerous, songs were luxuries, yet the officer placed a wooden crate near the door. Inside lay more paper, more pencils, even a few tattered books. He nodded once, then left. The women stared after him. A murmur rippled through the room. Sachiko shook her head. "It is a trick. They want to see us reveal ourselves. They want to watch." Others whispered differently. "Perhaps they mean it. Perhaps they will allow us a small mercy." That night, hesitance gave way to bravery. A mother began with a children's tune, her voice trembling. Another joined, harmonizing softly. Soon, voices layered upon voices, lullabies, festival songs, hymns carried from grandmothers. The sound filled the enclosure like a tide, fragile yet unstoppable. The guards did not intervene. One even paused near the door, his silhouette still, then walked on. The women sang until exhaustion stilled their tongues, leaving behind a silence that felt lighter than before. In the days that followed, singing became part of survival. Each evening, after food had been distributed and the guards had taken their posts, songs rose from the enclosure. Some were soft prayers, others were old work songs, the kind women once sang in rice fields. Children clapped in rhythm, laughter returning like sunlight breaking through clouds. The shock deepened. The Americans not only tolerated their voices, they protected the space in which those voices rose. One evening, the translator returned with a question. "What do you sing? The commander wants to know." Fear froze the women. Was this curiosity or mockery? Finally, Aiko answered, "Songs of home, songs for our children." The translator nodded. The officer behind him listened, then gave a curt order. More supplies were brought, scraps of cloth that could be stitched into simple instruments, small sticks of charcoal for writing lyrics. The women could hardly believe it. Instead of silencing them, the Americans were giving them tools to strengthen their voices. It was mercy, but mercy with weight. Aiko found herself leading songs more often. Her clairs, our tonne carried above the others, weaving strength into the air. She watched the guards sometimes, their shadows shifting beyond the fence. They never stepped closer, never applauded, but they did not turn away either. She wondered if the melodies reminded them of their own homes, their own families far across the ocean. One night a child asked, "Mama, will the Americans sing too?" The mothers hushed him, but the thought lingered. Could such a thing be possible? Enemy and captive sharing song? The idea seemed both terrifying and holy. Meanwhile, the letters the women had written were returned with responses. Crumpled envelopes bore handwriting they recognized. Families alive in distant towns wrote back, "We feared you dead. Now we know you live." Tears streaked faces as women clutched the fragile papers, reading them aloud to those who had received nothing. The act of hearing familiar words while their own voices filled the nights created a strange echo. Home living inside captivity. Still, doubt gnawed at them. Ilse, the bitter one, always waiting for cruelty, muttered, "This is their weapon. They make us sing so we forget we are prisoners." Yet even she hummed under her breath when she thought no one listened. By late summer, the commander visited the enclosure. He stood at the edge while the translator explained, "He says you may sing tomorrow night, loud, for all to hear." The women recoiled. A performance? For the enemy? But the order was clear. Not a demand, but permission. The next evening, lanterns lined the perimeter. The guards stood farther back, leaving open space. The women gathered, hearts pounding, voices trembling. Aiko stepped forward, her hands shaking. She began a hymn, one her mother had taught her in childhood. Slowly others joined. The sound swelled, carrying beyond the fence, floating over the camp. When the final note faded, silence fell heavy. Then, to their shock, the Americans did nothing. No jeers, no mockery, no applause. Only silence, respectful, unbroken. The women realized the truth. They had been allowed not just to sing, but to be heard. That night, Aiko wrote in her diary, "We thought our voices were lost. Instead, the enemy gave them back. Mercy is heavier than chains, because it forces us to live when we expected only death." The days slipped into a rhythm inside the enclosure, though it was a rhythm none of the women had expected. Food arrived at regular intervals, blankets were exchanged when worn, and guards circled the fence line with the same steady pace. But it was the nights that began to reshape everything. Nights no longer belonged to silence and dread. Nights belonged to voices. It had started with Aiko's lullaby, then another mother's cherry blossom song, and before long every evening became a gathering of whispers that rose into melody. At first, the women looked over their shoulders in fear, certain the Americans would burst in to punish them. Yet the soldiers never interfered. They stood beyond the wire, silent shadows with helmets glinting under lantern light. Their stillness was unsettling, but it was not violent. The children, who had grown restless and fearful in the weeks of hiding, leaned against their mothers, eyes fluttering shut as songs carried them into uneasy sleep. Even the infants, once soothed only by frantic rocking, settled when the familiar rhythms filled the air. For the first time since capture, there was a hint of peace. Aiko's voice became the center of the ritual. She had not chosen the role, yet her tone was steady when others cracked. She sang the songs her mother once hummed while washing rice, the hymns whispered in village temples, the folk melodies of spring festivals she thought she would never hear again. The others looked to her now, waiting for her to begin. Sometimes she faltered, shame burning her cheeks, but the nods of older women urged her forward. The Americans seemed to notice. One afternoon, the translator entered with a message from the camp commander. "He says," the translator began carefully, "that the camp is quieter when you sing. He says, 'Thank you.'" The words struck the enclosure like a blow. Gratitude from the enemy? The women exchanged startled glances. Some whispered it was mockery, others clung to the possibility it was genuine. Sachiko muttered bitterly, "They want to make us docile. This is their trick." Yet even she raised her frail voice the next evening, her bitterness woven into the hymn she sang. Days later, another surprise arrived. A crate was set inside the gate, filled with cloth, thread, and needles. "For sewing," the translator explained. The women stared in disbelief. In captivity, they had expected only deprivation. Yet here was material for creation. At first they hesitated, but soon mothers began stitching tiny flowers into scraps, children tracing patterns with small fingers. Aiko embroidered a crane, its wings outstretched. That night she sang the crane song, holding the cloth high, and the enclosure shimmered with tears as voices joined. The Red Cross letters deepened the shock. Paper returned with familiar handwriting, carried across oceans. Some messages bore grief: husbands dead, homes burned, siblings lost to hunger. Others carried hope. "We thought you dead. Now we know you live." Women wept openly, pressing pages to their hearts. Even those who received no reply leaned close, listening as others read aloud. That night the songs slowed, heavy with mourning, yet no one remained silent. Then came the day that carved itself into memory. At dusk the translator gathered them. His face was tight, pale. "Japan has surrendered," he said. The words seemed impossible. For a moment no one moved. Then voices fractured, gasps, sobs, whispers. Some women collapsed, clutching their children. Relief crashed against humiliation. They had lived through captivity, but for what country would they return? Aiko's knees buckled. She whispered, "Does this mean home?" The translator nodded slowly. "In time. Ships will come. For now, you remain here." That night the women sang louder than ever before. They chose not lullabies or prayers, but songs of resilience, war songs, festival songs, melodies once forbidden. Their voices spilled into the camp, climbing over fences, reaching the ears of soldiers who paused in their patrols. For the first time, they sang not to soothe children or themselves, but to declare, "We exist, we endure." The guards stood motionless. Lantern light flickered across their faces. No one silenced the women. No one mocked. The Americans listened, and the silence after the final verse was heavier than chains. As weeks passed, preparations for repatriation began. American nurses arrived with brushes, urging women to comb their hair. "Look strong when you return," they said gently. Children were given shoes far too large, donated by American stores. Women accepted them in silence, hearts tangled with dread. What awaited them at home? Ruins? Judgment? Still, every evening the ritual held. The songs became more than comfort, they became survival itself. Even Sachiko, who had once warned against hope, now hummed without protest. Aiko's diary filled with notes. "Singing is the only proof we are still human." Then, one night, something extraordinary occurred. As Aiko's voice carried the crane hymn, another sound joined faintly beyond the wire. A low hum, rough, but steady, matched the melody. At first the women froze, breath caught in their throats. Was it mockery? A cruel imitation? But the tone did not jeer. It followed, respectful, until the last note fell away. It was a guard, an American. Silence slammed down after, thicker than ever. No woman spoke, no child stirred. The enemy had not only permitted their voices, he had echoed them. That night, Aiko pressed her embroidered crane to her chest and wrote on the margin of a Red Cross envelope, "We were told to expect silence, shame, and death. Instead, the enemy gave us back our sound. The greatest mercy is not food nor blankets, but this, being allowed to sing of home." The day of departure arrived without ceremony. Orders passed quietly through the camp, the same translator delivering the news. "Tomorrow you will leave." For a moment the enclosure was hushed, as if no one dared breathe. The women had waited months for such words, whispering prayers for them, and now they stood stunned. Departure meant freedom, yet it also meant the end of the strange cocoon in which they had lived, a cage that gave them food, blankets, and the chance to sing when they thought silence would bury them. The next morning, American trucks lined the road outside the wire. Canvas covers stretched across their backs, ropes securing supplies, soldiers posted on each side. Guards motioned for the women to gather their bundles. Mothers tied scraps of cloth around their children's waists, clutching them close. Some carried Red Cross letters in hidden folds. Others kept embroidered handkerchiefs stitched during long nights. Aiko clutched her crane, wings outstretched in thread. The soldiers did not rush them. They stepped aside, eyes turned deliberately away as the women climbed into the trucks. The rumble of engines filled the air, and the convoy rolled slowly toward the sea. The voyage. The harbour was a graveyard. Ships lay broken at their moorings, masts splintered, hulls blackened with smoke. Yet among the ruins, one vessel remained whole, a U.S. transport ship draped with Red Cross banners. Its decks smelled of oil and salt, ropes creaking as sailors prepared to depart. The women boarded hesitantly, children pressed against them. To step onto American steel felt like stepping deeper into captivity, yet the soldiers only guided them to a partitioned section of deck. Canvas walls rose around them, mats laid neatly, barrels of water standing full. Food waited in crates, biscuits, canned fruit, tins of milk. The ship's engines roared, pulling them from the shore. Japan receded into haze, its outline fading beneath smoke and cloud. The women huddled together, watching the land vanish. For weeks they had feared the Americans' hands. Now they feared what awaited in their homeland. Nights at sea stretched long. The water groaned beneath the hull, waves slapping rhythm against steel. Children cried with seasickness, and mothers rocked them gently, singing the same songs that had carried them through captivity. Cranes flying home, cherry blossoms drifting, prayers whispered into lullabies. To their astonishment, no one silenced them. Sailors passed by, some pausing just beyond the canvas to listen before moving on. One left a lantern near their section, its glow softening the dark. Another, with awkward kindness, placed a sack of oranges inside the enclosure and retreated without a word. The shock lingered. Even here, surrounded by enemy sailors, their voices were permitted. After 2 weeks, the shoreline of Japan rose before them. But this was no homeland they remembered. Ruins stretched along the coast, houses collapsed into ash, smokestacks broken, fields scarred. The port itself was half destroyed. Families crowded the dock, faces hollow, clothes in tatters, hands clutching photographs. The ship moored slowly, ropes groaning, gangways lowered. The women disembarked in silence, bundles pressed tight. Some scanned the crowd desperately. Aiko's eyes darted until she found her sister, thinner, frailer, but alive. They collided, sobs breaking loose, arms clutching as if to fuse together. Around them, mothers found children grown, husbands limping from wounds, grandparents stooped with hunger. Yet joy was cut with suspicion. Neighbors' eyes lingered too long, whispers curled like smoke. They were captives. They were in enemy hands. What was done to them? The women tried to explain. They gave us food, they said. They kept their distance. They let us sing. But the words fell like stones into a well. Faces hardened. Mercy did not fit the story people told themselves about the enemy. Some women fell silent out of shame. Others defended themselves fiercely, only to be met with disbelief. Aiko clutched her crane, hiding it inside her kimono, unwilling to let it draw questions. In the weeks that followed, the women scattered to their ruined towns. Some returned to empty houses, others to ashes where their homes had stood. Villages received them with wary curiosity. To have survived captivity was already suspect. To return untouched was unthinkable. Sachiko's own daughter whispered, "Mama, did they hurt you?" The older woman pressed her rosary tight and said, "No, they did not." But the disbelief in her child's eyes cut deeper than any blade. Mothers who had sung lullabies in the camp now found themselves mute. Daughters who had stitched flowers into handkerchiefs hid them away. The songs that had carried them through nights of fear became secrets too dangerous to repeat. And yet, alone, many still sang. Aiko whispered the crane hymn as she swept dust from her doorway. Sachiko hummed prayers while kneeling at a broken shrine. The voices survived, but only in private. Legacy of song, years passed. Japan rebuilt. Markets filled with voices again. Radios poured new music into crowded streets, and schoolchildren sang lessons in classrooms. Yet the women who had once been captives kept their secret songs tucked away. When grandchildren asked for lullabies, some mothers taught them melodies without revealing where they had been sung. "These are old songs," they would say. Only rarely did truth slip out. Iko, older now, held her embroidered crane one evening while her granddaughter traced the stitches. "Oba-san," the girl asked, "where did you learn this song?" Aiko stared at the dark window, remembering lantern light on barbed wire, the echo of a guard humming her melody. She smiled faintly. "In a place of fences," she said softly, "where we thought silence would kill us, they let us sing of home." Her granddaughter did not understand then, but years later she would. The shock that endured, historians counted battles, ships sunk, bombs dropped, numbers filled their books, graphs rose and fell. But for these women, history was not measured in statistics. It was measured in silence that never fell, in songs that refused to die, in the shock of mercy where cruelty had been promised. For decades, they told few. They feared disbelief, ridicule, accusations of weakness. Yet in private diaries, on scraps of cloth, in lullabies carried forward, the truth survived. The Americans had not silenced them. They had allowed them to sing. And for the women who returned to a country rebuilt on ashes, that memory was heavier than any chain, the mercy of being heard.